Hello, Arlington County parents. My name is Ann Dolin, and tonight we're talking about the changing landscape of college admissions and testing in a year of COVID and beyond. And for the last 22 years, my tutors and I at Educational Connections Tutoring and Test Prep have been helping prepare kids for the SAT and ACT, helping them polish their essays and to press send by early action in November so they have officially applied to college. So tonight we're going to be talking about some really important things, the changes in college admissions and what they look like in our area and throughout the country, the role of testing and decisions, the SAT and ACT, and how different it is this year from all the other years, deciding which test is best if your child is going to take a test, and then the rising importance of essays, recommendations, and even AP scores. So I put a lot of this information together for you in a great email that has a 4-part series on applying to college. And you can get that easily by texting 55444 and the word college, and it will be delivered to your inbox. I'm also going to talk about some practice test dates as we go along. So that will be in this email as well. All right, so every year I go to schools in the fall, to high schools, and I talk to them about the factors of admission and what it takes to get kids into colleges these days. And every year I see parents in person, but it's different this year. Everything is virtual. But let me share with you a graph that I shared with parents last fall. Here's what it looked like. These were the factors that admissions officers said they took into account, and they actually felt were the most important when they were considering students' applications for acceptance to their college or university. 89% of college officials said grades in college prep courses were the most important. So these aren't grades in PE or marketing, but they're grades in core classes like English, math, science, history, and a foreign language. The strength of the curriculum, that means if your child had a chance to be challenged by taking an honors, AP, IB, or dual enrollment class, did he or she? How strong is the curriculum? That was coming in at 87%. And then right behind that at 82% were scores on the SAT and the ACT. And it was really these 3 factors that were the biggest indicators in whether the student would get into college or not. And then there were lots of things far behind that, like counselor or teacher recommendations, the essays, demonstrated interest. Does it seem like your child really wants to go to college there? AP or IB test scores, the interview if schools offered it. Those things were also important, but not as much as those top 3 factors. All right, here is our new reality because it's different. When it comes to seniors, here's what schools are looking at. Grades in those college prep classes. Again, that strength of the curriculum. How many AP, IB, or dual enrollment classes did the student take? And then right behind that are essays. Essays are more important than ever before because schools want another way to get to know your child. What is unique about your child? What will he or she bring to the college or university if he comes here? Why does the student want to come to this college in the first place? All those things are important. And then behind that are extracurriculars, recommendations from counselors or teachers, because quite frankly, educators trust educators, and then AP or IB scores if the student wishes to submit them. But what you will not find on this list are SAT or ACT scores. And here's why. In so many areas across the country, in this past 9 months, schools had to cancel testing administrations left and right. So kids would prepare for an SAT or ACT, they would work really hard, and then the day before, their test would be canceled. And it happened in many areas, not just our area. And what ended up happening is that some kids, where COVID wasn't so bad, ended up still being able to take a test because their schools weren't shut down. But other kids, not so much. They even prepped hard and still couldn't sit for an exam. So colleges came together and said, look, it's not really fair if student A in Iowa gets to submit a test score, but student B in Arlington, Virginia doesn't have a test score to submit. I can't really hold that against him or her. So they said, you know what, for this year, we're going to be test optional. Every school said we're not going to consider test scores in decisions. If you don't have a test score to send, it's not a problem. It won't be a factor. So that is for seniors. Now, it's likely going to be different for all the kids coming behind them, juniors, sophomores, and freshmen. But right now for seniors, testing isn't an issue. It's off the table. Here's what's important for seniors, but also all the kids coming up behind them. It's the essay. Essays are so important for the reasons I just described. And there's actually 3 ways kids can complete essays and send them into their colleges. Really, it's based on the application type. Most schools in the country are on an application called the Common App. That means that all the schools on this application will read the same information from the student. So just one time, the student will put in all their basic information. They'll write an essay. There's multiple essays the student can choose from to write on, and usually these are 650-word essays. They'll upload their grades, their test scores, anything else that's important, and then that information will be sent to the school. So the Common Application, you do it once, and it's sent to multiple schools. There's also another application called the Coalition app, and the Coalition is a newer type of application. For example, Virginia Tech is only on the Coalition, but UVA uses the Common App. So the Coalition app has, again, its own essay. And so students, if they apply to both UVA and Virginia Tech, those are 2 separate essays. And then some schools have their own application. They say, you know what, I don't like the Common App and I'm not really into the Coalition, so we're just going to do our own thing because it's even better. And so kids will have to input all their information again for schools that have their own application. But that's not all of it. Actually, there's a lot more that has to be done, because in addition, schools also may have their own essays. So in addition to that Common App, let's say you're applying to University of Delaware, they have 2 essays that you also have to do. Sometimes schools will say, look, these essays are optional, but really they're not. You should do them. If you don't, it's held against you. It looks like you're not an all-in applicant. So you definitely should do those. So when you think about it, and the kids in our area, they're applying to between 6 and 10 colleges. If every college has 2 essays, plus you throw in it your Common App, your Coalition app, whatever else, it could be you're looking at up to 20 essays, and it's a ton of work for kids. I think one of the biggest mistakes kids make is they really underestimate how long it's going to take them to go through the entire process. And they think, because they've heard of the Common App, oh, I just do it once and I'm done. But actually, that's not the case. So the best piece of advice I can give to kids in applying to college is please start early. You want to start the spring of your junior year. You can look at the prompts and you can start thinking, out of all the Common App prompts, for example, which one is best for me? Which one is going to really make me shine? Can I write about the best? And then you're going to start thinking through that. You might start creating an outline, parsing out your ideas. Over the summer, you want to work really hard. You know, this is something we've spent a tremendous amount of time with, especially in more recent years with kids, because kids are applying to more schools than ever before. And as I mentioned, it's a tremendous amount of work. So one thing that they have a really hard time doing is determining where they're going to apply early action, where they might decide to apply early decision, perhaps regular decision, what kind of application the school is on, how many other essays that they have to write. Are any of the essays similar so that they can reuse information, for example? What else do they need to do to get that information into their application and get it done? And so a lot of it, honestly, is starting out is planning and then putting together a schedule of getting everything done. So you want to start thinking about it in the spring, getting it done in the summer. So by the time you hit your senior year, you're not really thinking too much about your applications. You're focused on your grades, because the grades your senior year are incredibly important. Sometimes kids think, oh, I'm done. I've already applied. It doesn't matter. Not true. Pretty much every school is going to want to see your senior grades, not obviously your whole year, but they may ask for your first quarter. And if your grades are good, you're going to want to send them in anyways. Many times, especially if you're on a wait list, which is super common, schools are going to want to see your first semester grade. So everything up until January. So for that reason, you don't want to be stressed out in the fall, still just starting your applications or getting a lot done. You kind of want to be on the tail end of it. So start early, get support early. If you feel for your child this is going to be a daunting task, we can help. There's lots of people out there that can help your child not just do the technical parts of the essay, but really parse out their journey as well. All right, here's something new. This is from the Common App. This year they said, look, because so many kids have been impacted by COVID, we want to give them an opportunity to write about it. Now, this is a super short essay, and when I say it's optional, typically in college world, optional means you really should do it. But in this case, it honestly is totally optional. Do not write this essay. I tell kids, do not write this essay unless you have something really important to say. Here is the prompt. Community disruptions such as COVID-19 and natural disasters can have deep and long-lasting impacts. If you need it, this space is yours to describe those impacts. Colleges care about the effects on your health and well-being, safety, family circumstances, future plans, and education, including access to reliable technology and quiet study spaces. So let's say your child's grades plummeted, maybe in the spring, or maybe this fall, they just didn't really have a great quarter. Whatever it is, something happened, but they learned from it and they rebounded and they came back strong. That might be something that they can write an essay about. If your child ended up playing Xbox in the basement during COVID, that wouldn't be something you want to write an essay about. It doesn't help you look any better. But if, however, maybe you helped people in your neighborhood or you helped somebody who is disadvantaged, maybe during this time you started a small business, you use the time to better yourself, that would be a great thing to write this optional essay about. It's only 250 words, doesn't take a lot of time. But in this case, I would say do it. If you have something important that can help your application, go for it. All right, so we talked about the essays, even that supplemental one, important for not just seniors, all kids. Let's talk about test scores. So we know that they're off the table for seniors. So if they didn't take a test or they don't submit a score, it's not a problem at all. Sometimes parents will say, well, my child's a senior and I know the scores don't really matter that much, but he got a crazy good score. Should I submit it? And the answer is yes. Although admissions folks say we don't really look at scores this year, it's hard to know if that's completely true. And if your child has something super compelling that you want to share, absolutely send it in. All right, so we know this about seniors, but let's talk about juniors and then all the kids coming up. There are 3 ways you're going to know if you need a test score at a university. Some schools require them. They say, if you're going to apply here, you have to submit an SAT or ACT. They do not care which test. It totally doesn't matter. Every school in America takes both tests, and no school in America has a preference. They honestly don't. It's a toss-up. You can apply, you can send one or the other. They don't care. You just need to send one if it's required. Now, a lot of schools are test optional, and this is a really big trend, and I expect it to amplify in the future. That means it is honestly optional. If you have a score that's going to help you and you want to send it in, go for it. They'll consider it. But if you don't submit a score, these schools will not see it as a black mark on your record. They will not hold it against you. The last category is called test blind. Test blind means that colleges don't even look at scores. They do not consider them. Don't send it in. You can if you want, but they're not even going to look at it. So why bother? They are test blind and they do not consider scores. And here's why, because the data shows that in fact, grades are the greatest predictor of how a student is going to do in college. It just is. If you've done well in high school, you're probably going to do well in college grade-wise. Now, when you couple grades with test scores, it helps colleges to understand a little bit better how you're going to do in college. Data shows that with a good test score and good grades give you a slight advantage in college, but it's not at all significant. And for that reason, colleges are saying, well, if test scores aren't a really good predictor of how the student is going to go and do in college, maybe we shouldn't even ask for them anymore. Furthermore, test scores are a data point for colleges. However, so many colleges like test scores because it's really easy for them to see, especially really competitive schools. Does the student meet our threshold? And for that reason, it's just another data point. So schools still like to see test scores, especially if the competitive ones. And that's why they are required at some schools. It helps make decisions. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on in our area of Virginia. This is data based on the school's website. So whenever you're thinking about, well, what's the GPA for this school? What's the test score? What is the percentage of kids that get in? How many kids do they waitlist? All those things always go to the actual source, the school's website. Although you can go to other sites like College Data and other for-profit sites, the information isn't always accurate and it's not always up to date. So always go to the school site. Okay, so anyways, this is information coming directly from those schools right now, but it could change. And honestly, right now things are changing so quickly in the world of college admissions that it would not surprise me. So right now UVA is saying they want a test score, it's required. Virginia Tech wants a test score, it's required. William and Mary is interesting right now. They just announced a 3-year pilot. So for 3 years, they're going to be test optional. And then at the end of those 3 years, they're going to see, did the test help them? Without a test, did kids do just as well in college? And if so, they're probably going to stay test optional. And it's my bet they will. JMU, it's been test optional for about 3 years. George Mason was one of the first schools in our area to go test optional. But George Mason, like other schools, some of their programs are not, and you have to submit a test score. For example, their School of Engineering requires a test score, so you have to send one in. Christopher Newport is test optional. And VCU is also test optional, but on their website, it is recommended. They like to see test scores. I remember when my younger son was applying to college last year, he applied to VCU, and I don't know why he didn't send in his test score, even though he had a really good ACT score. And the admissions department called me. They called him, they texted him, and they emailed him, and they said, look, you really need to submit a test score, which he did. So it honestly depends on the school, whether or not you need to submit a test score. All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, like when the school is test optional, should you submit one? Because that's important to know. So here's what I think about when it comes to testing. What I like kids to do is to determine which test they're going to take, and then based on their baseline scores, if they should go ahead and prep for that test and submit a score. So the first step is to take practice tests. Practice tests I find are extremely helpful. First of all, these are retired tests that are very similar to the current ones that kids take. But the great thing about practice tests it's just for your information only. That data isn't anywhere out there. So we offer them most Saturdays. Kids roll out of bed all the time. 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning, they take a practice ACT. The next weekend, they'll take a practice ACT. And you can find them on our website, which is ectutoring.com. If you go to the test prep tab, you'll see mock test dates or practice test dates, and you can look at those and just sign your child up directly there. So if you want this delivered to your inbox, if you texted 55444 in the word college, I'll send you that 4-part article I mentioned, and I'll also send you these test dates. But anyways, so your child is going to take both the SAT and ACT ideally. This is helpful because then we see their scores, we'll put them into a concordance table for the student. It will tell the student which test they did better on. About 1/3 of students do naturally better on one test over another. About 2/3 of kids, it's really a toss-up. There's honestly no difference. So When that happens, we talk to them about their personal preference. Which one felt most comfortable for you? And, kids tell us all different things. Some kids will say, oh, I'd like the SAT because I like the pacing of that. It was a little bit slower. I had more time on each question. Sometimes kids are just more familiar with the SAT because they've taken the PSAT multiple times. And sometimes they'll say, you know what, I only want to take a practice SAT. I don't really care about the ACT. I got a good score on my PSAT already. I'm going to go in this direction, and that's fine. Other times when kids take both tests and we'll talk to them about their preferences, they'll say things like, oh, I actually like the ACT better. I understood the questions. Yeah, it was a little bit faster, but I knew what they were asking me, and it just felt like it was more approachable. So at that point, kids, either they're naturally doing better on a test or they have a preference. Really, that's the test they should prep for and take. We recommend that because if you're really splitting your focus and putting a ton of time into both tests, you're wasting time, you're wasting your effort. If you're getting help, you're wasting your money, when really you could be spending that time and effort on your grades. You do not need to prep for both tests. Pick one, go in that direction, but be willing to be flexible because it may be you prep for the ACT, you're all in for the ACT, but your date is canceled. We just do not know these things. You might have to pivot and take the SAT, and that's okay. Many of the skills are transferable. We'll talk in a little bit about the differences in the tests, but if that happens, it's okay. And you can do that too. So we want to take a practice test, number one, to figure out which is the best score for the student. But number two, get a baseline score. And this is important. Many parents will ask, what's a good score on the SAT or ACT? And the answer is, it depends on the college in which you want to apply. Let's say you want to go to a William & Mary, which, by the way, is extremely competitive. It's very, very hard to get into William & Mary. All right, let's say you're an ACT student, and this is the test you decided that you want to take. You take a baseline test, and you get a 20. Well, look at the ACT scores. It's between 30 and 34, and a 36 is a perfect score. Getting from a 20 to a 30 is incredibly, incredibly difficult, and it's very rare for kids to make a jump like that. It might be that if your grades are really fabulous and you've got lots of things going for you, that you apply without a test score, because even if you prep and you score a little bit better, maybe you get up to a 25, it's not enough to be in that range for William & Mary where it's going to help your application. So you would be a test optional kid. Let's say, and not apply with a score. Let's say you're coming in and you're at a 28. You're pretty close. You want to get in that mid-range, hopefully towards the latter end. You come in at a 28 and you're willing to put time, energy, and effort into preparing. If that's you, you should prepare and set up dates to take the ACT, because it's likely you're going to get in that range and that can help your application. So that's kind of how you know. This practice test helps you know which is going to be the best test for you. It helps establish your baseline. And then through a conversation, we talk to parents about this every single day. We help you decide, should your child even prep for a test in the first place? Do you need to invest this time and money? And number two, if you decide to do it, when should your child register for a test, and how long out should they prepare? All right. So let's talk about the differences in the tests. The SAT, is considered a power test. This means there are fewer questions, but they're wordier and they actually require a lot of critical thinking and analysis. So that's the difficulty in it. It's actually the interpretation. Now the ACT is different. It's a speed test. There are more questions, but they're shorter. And a lot of kids will say they're more like school. So they're pretty straightforward. I'd say they're student friendly. The difficulty in the ACT is in the pacing. You got to go at a pretty fast clip. It's really the speed. However, if you have accommodations, meaning if you have a 504 or an IEP and you get extra time, the vast majority of situations, the ACT is going to be the better test for you, because with your accommodation, the issue of speed or pacing is taken out of the equation. And now you can just focus on the material. So for that reason, if you have accommodations, I would encourage you to take a strong look at the ACT. All right, so let's talk about what these tests actually look like. Let's start with the SAT. There's two sections. There's math and there's evidence-based reading and writing. Both sections are worth 800 points, and you get a combined total point spread of 1,600 points. That's a perfect score. Now, in addition to math and evidence-based reading and writing, there's another part, the essay, which is not included in your score. However, a couple of years ago, I used to tell kids you really should take the essay, but these days I don't. You do not have to take the essay. There's only a handful of schools left in the country that want to see an essay. And, look at the schools on your list, but chances are they're not going to want the essay. So we tell kids, look at your schools, but really don't plan on taking the essay. The test is really long with it. It's almost 4 hours, but without it, it's just a little bit over 3 hours. All right. The ACT is different. It has 4 sections. It has math. It has reading. It has writing, which is not a free write. It's grammar, just like the SAT. The writing section, not the essay, but the actual writing section is all about grammar. And then there's a 4th section, and it's science. And a lot of times kids freak out about this section. When I tell them about the ACT, they'll say, oh, that's not for me. I couldn't stand biology. I hated chemistry. I was terrible at physics. I am not a science person. This test is just a bad idea. But here's the thing. The science section is actually like reading comprehension, because you're looking at these graphs and these charts, and you have to extrapolate information and boil it down and answer questions about it. So it honestly is a lot of reading comprehension, and it's out of all the sections on the ACT, I think it is the most coachable. So the average for all of those sections and your total perfect score is 36. Again, with the ACT, there's an essay, not averaged. It's a little bit shorter test, about 3.5 hours with the essay and just under 3 hours without the essay. All right, so your next step, let's say you have taken both tests and you've decided that you're going to go with the ACT. And now you've decided that you want to figure out when you're going to take it for the first time. So you go on the ACT website, actstudent.org, and you look at the test dates. You see a February date and you think, great, I'm going to sign up for the February date, and you should. If you see dates that are available for sign up, you should go ahead and sign up. And the reason is test space is limited now because of social distancing. So they used to have these huge tests with hundreds of kids, and that's not the case anymore. So they're limiting the size of the test. And, because so many have been canceled, if you see a date that looks attractive to you, just go ahead and sign up for it. Now, once you have that first date in your head, and if you're able to sign up for it, you should, you want to start thinking about your second date. Here's why. If you take it in February, you'll get your scores back about 2 weeks later. You look at your scores and you see where you didn't do well. This is important. Like kids usually want to see where they did well. But in this case, you want to see where you did poorly. Then you're going to prepare and prep and study in those areas that you didn't do as well. And then you're going to retake it in April. Now you have a plan. You don't just have one date and you're not just winging it, but you have a plan. You're going to take it, get your scores back, see where you can improve, practice, 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 and take it again. Most kids take the test 2 or 3 times. So as an example, you could take it February, April, you could take it February, June, you could take it April, June, but have that 2 paired dates in your head. SAT, you could take it March or May, you could take it March or June. But keep in mind that the best scores you're going to get are going to be in the spring of your junior year or the fall of your senior year, statistically speaking. Scores in the spring of your junior year and the fall of your senior year are better because you're older, you are more mature, and you have more curriculum under your belt. So often kids are, not often, a lot, they're in panic mode, and they'll say to me, look, oh my God, I'm so far behind. I'm a junior and I didn't take any spring tests and I'm freaking out. All my friends before took spring tests when they were juniors, or my brother took fall tests. Sorry. I'm really, really behind. And the answer is you're not. Statistically speaking, you're going to do better the spring of your junior year. But what we've found in the last 5 years is there really has been a push to test kids early and often. And that always isn't the best approach. Now, this year, kids haven't been able to test early and often because of COVID. So they're worried that they're behind, and they're not. It's okay. If you're a junior and you haven't taken a test yet, it's not a problem at all. You can take them in the spring. There's a couple of summer dates, and you can even take it again in the fall. So be flexible on your dates. If one of them's canceled, you're going to have to jump ship to another test or to a different date, and that's okay. And if you need help with your testing plan, we help families with this all the time. It's called a consult, and there's no cost at all. We'll help you. You can figure it out, and then you can be on your way. And it's really easy. But I will say it's very individual for every family because every student is different. All right. So here are the ways your child can prepare. Here's the old-fashioned way. They can buy a book. They can go over to Barnes & Noble, get a book, and they can practice independently. And this is actually a good way. And it's a good way because right now, tests are still paper and pencil. So when you practice with paper and pencil, that's even better. You can practice online. There's tons of free resources. Naviance has free practice tests and free samples that kids can work through. The SAT, which is the College Board, has partnered with Khan Academy, and they offer free prep, and so does the ACT. Or you could take a group class. Many of these are online now, or you could work one-on-one with a tutor, which is what we do. So everything's completely customized to what your child needs to work on. But what I would caution you is to be careful of things that overpromise. Things like boot camps where, there's a 2-day class the weekend before the test, and they're going to teach you all the tricks for the test. Your brain doesn't work like that. Your brain cannot take lots of information in a short amount of time and apply it to something. It just doesn't work. And I know this from personal experience. When I first started out, we used to offer boot camps all the time. And then when I looked at the data and I looked at the gains between kids that were in our boot camp classes and then kids that had one-to-one tutoring, it was like night and day. And so we just stopped offering boot camps. They just are not effective. You want your brain to be able to learn the information, synthesize it, sleep on it, put it into long-term information, learn some more information, and just space it out over time. So if you're going to take a February test, start now. Practice a little bit at a time, a couple times a week leading up until the test. Now, there's also 3 ways students can improve. They can learn test-taking strategies. I will tell you that there's not a bag of tricks that you can learn and just say, all right, now I'm going to get a better test score because I learned these tricks. There really aren't tricks, but there are strategies. For example, a test-taking strategy is process of elimination, knowing how best to use that strategy and pick away at the answers that you are not correct, no or correct, and then narrow it down at the end. Working backwards in math, that's another strategy. You can also practice content review. To be honest, many of the kids we see don't have great grammar skills, especially if they're in a public school. They haven't had a ton of grammar practice over the years. So they may not know a lot of the rules. That's content review. We help them fine-tune those rules. Or maybe they haven't seen geometry in a while. We'll help them work on the basics of geometry. So when they see geometry questions on the test, it comes back to them. That's content review. And then the third way to improve is simulated full-length practice tests. These are long. Again, they're about 3 hours, but it's important. You want to take a couple of these leading up to your test because it helps with 2 things. It helps with your pacing, the time you have for each section and the time you have for each question. That's super important. And then it also really, really helps with that endurance factor. It helps reduce your fatigue because you've practiced it in this simulated session, and it makes it easier when you go to take the real test. But as I mentioned earlier, even though you can work on all of these things, you want to be sure you're not taking you're not working equally on everything. That's not helpful. You don't want to work on the things that you're already good at, which feels strange to us as parents because we've been telling our kids, do what you love, follow your passion, work on what you're good at. But in the world of test prep, that does not help at all. You want to look at where you're bad, where your weaknesses are, and you really want to hone those because that's going to help boost your score the most. All right, so how does all this data get reported to schools? There are a couple of different ways. One is score choice, and score choice means that kids these days own their data. 5 years ago, this was not the case. And many schools said when you applied to, say, University of South Carolina, they wanted to see all your test scores. Even if you took it 3 times, you did well twice, you did terrible once, you had to send all 3. But that's not the case anymore. You own your information. So you can choose which test to send. So if you took the SAT twice and you bombed one but did well on the other, you just send the one you did well on. There's also something called super scoring, and this is rising in popularity. This is when the school will cherry pick your highest subscores. And they actually want to show that the kids applying to their school and the kids that are getting in are really good students and they have really good test scores. It makes them look better. So they cherry pick. So let's say you took the SAT twice, you get a 500 in math and a 600 on reading and writing. You take it again, you get a 600 on math, a 500 in reading and writing. So in reality, you have an 1100. But when your scores are cherry picked, the school, either through a computer system or a person, will take your 600, and now you have a 1200, which is actually a lot better than 1100. So that's how super scoring works. This is brand new. The ACT automatically super scores now. So if you take the ACT twice, they automatically, without you doing anything, send your top subtest scores to the school, making up this brand new composite score. So a lot of kids will say, for that reason, they were kind of leaning towards the ACT anyways. They'll say, oh, I love their new super scoring policy. I'm just going to go with the ACT. It is kind of attractive. I've also told kids, like, look, here's the real deal. Don't pick a school based on how they report their reporting policies. That's not really helpful because, just because you look better when your scores are cherry picked and super scored, everybody else you're competing against at that school also has super scores. So unless they just took it once. It's not an automatic shoo-in for kids. All right, so why does all this matter? Well, it actually matters a lot because a small increase in scores can make a big difference. Let's say your student is coming in. I'm going to use that ACT as an example. Your kid's coming in and they have a 25 on a baseline, but they can study and they can improve their score to a 28. Well, I will tell you a 28 is significantly better than a 25 because on the ACT, again, it's only out of a 36. So a 28 is a very, very solid score. In fact, nationwide, the average ACT score is a 21, and in the state of Virginia, it's a 23. So if you're sitting on a 28, that's fabulous. That score is going to get you into a whole nother group of colleges than your 25. So that's why it's actually something you can control and something you want to do something about. There are lots of other things you cannot control. You can't control your grades your freshman year. You can't go back and redo something your sophomore year. You can't take a leadership role from the past, but what you can do now is you can study and improve your test scores, and you can also knock it out of the park with your essays. So those are things you can control. Don't worry about all the other things, what your friends are doing or what you don't have on your application. It's okay. You'll be just fine. Think about the things you can control. And you can also control when you do all of these things. As I mentioned, And the best stress reliever I've found for kids is to have a game plan early on, where you sit down with your child, either you or somebody else, and you look at the schools that they want to apply to. We help kids also categorize their list so they can think, what schools am I likely to get into? What are reach schools? Maybe what are target schools? The counselor can also help with that. But once they have their list of schools, then you want to start sitting down and saying, okay, let's work this out. When might you apply? How are we going to work this out between our vacations? What's this going to look like over the summer? So they have a general game plan of when they're going to get all this stuff done. I've seen far too many kids, the end of August, they've just kind of had a great summer, which they all should. They've put it off, and the end of August, it's just a complete stress factory in their house. The parent is really mad at them because they haven't done anything yet. And you don't want that to happen in your family. Ideally, want to start having these conversations this spring of your child's junior year. All right, so that's all I have for you tonight. I hope this was helpful to you. It was a pleasure to see all of you and talk to you this evening. Again, if you want that information on that 4-part series on applying to colleges, a lot of it is contained in what I've talked about tonight. Just text college 55444, and it will also have the dates of upcoming practice exams for the SAT and ACT. I wish you all the very best. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm super fast on email. I will get back to you right away. And I hope the rest of your school year is a great one, and that the process of applying to college isn't too stressful for you, your student, and the rest of your family. Thank you so much, and have a great evening. Bye-bye.